In the United States, around 546,000 people are reported missing each year. On average, 99% of those missing person cases get resolved. But what about the 1% of missing person cases that remain unresolved? Today, we take a look at 7 of the most disturbing missing person cases that remain unresolved. Starting with the unsettling mystery of the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Brandon Swanson had just finished his spring semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, and he was celebrating with some friends in the town of Canby, Minnesota. That night, he left his friends sometime after midnight, intending to drive home to his parents' house in Marshall, Minnesota, about 30 miles away. But somewhere along that dark rural drive, something went completely wrong. At around 1:54 a.m., Brandon's car ran off the road into a ditch. He wasn't injured, but he couldn't get the vehicle unstuck. So, like any rational person would, he called his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, asking them to come pick him up. Brandon thought he was near the town of Lind, Minnesota, just a few miles away from Marshall. So his parents drove there and started flashing their headlights. Brandon said that he could see the headlights, but his parents couldn't see him. His parents kept describing where they were, but nothing matched up. Brandon insisted that he saw lights in the distance and that he was just off a gravel road. Confused, frustrated, and still on the phone, Brandon eventually told his parents that he was going to walk toward Lind, following the lights he believed were from the town. He told them to meet him there. What followed was a 47-minute phone call between Brandon and his father. Just Brandon walking alone on a dark rural road in the middle of the night. They talked the whole time. Brandon never seemed panicked. He was frustrated that they couldn't find each other, but he was calm and collected. Until suddenly, he wasn't. At 2:28 a.m., still on the phone with his father, Brandon abruptly said, "Oh shit," and then dead silence. The call disconnected. Brandon's parents, Brian and Annette, kept calling him over and over, but there was no answer. By the morning, they reported Brandon missing, but like so many other missing persons cases, the initial response from law enforcement was dismissive. He's 19, they said. Probably just, ran off. Maybe he's sleeping it off somewhere. But his parents knew better, and eventually the police agreed. They traced his last known call to an area not near Lind, but 25 miles away near the town of Taunton. Brandon had been way off course. His car was found just off a gravel road, exactly where he said it was, but nowhere near where his parents had been looking that night. Despite extensive searches with tracking dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of volunteers, Brandon was never found. Cadaver dogs traced his scent along a gravel road, through fields, and to the edge of the Yellow Medicine River, which was swollen with spring melt at the time. Did he fall in and drown? Did he succumb to the elements? Or did something or someone find him first? Now here's where it gets even more disturbing. No body was ever recovered. No shoes, no phone, no clothing, nothing. And given how flat and open the terrain is, the lack of physical evidence is just flat out chilling. Some theories suggests he may have had a head injury and became disoriented. Others believe he may have drowned and been, swept away. But there's also a darker possibility. Foul play. Could someone have picked him up after the call dropped? Could he have stumbled upon something or someone that he wasn't supposed to? To this day, Brandon Swanson has never been found. His case led to the creation of Brandon's Law, passed in Minnesota in 2009. It requires law enforcement to take missing persons reports seriously and act immediately. No more wait 24 hours excuses, especially for vulnerable adults. But for Brian and Annette, the law is only a small comfort. Every year, they still leave the porch light on for Brandon, hoping that somehow, someday, he'll come home. Or at the very least, they'll get the answers that they've been aching for. Brandon Swanson disappeared in the middle of the American Midwest, alone on a dark country road. His voice the only clue left behind. But our next case takes us far away from the fields of Minnesota to the sun-soaked coast of Bulgaria, a place you'd never expect to be the setting for one of the most bizarre and disturbing vanishings ever caught on camera. Because this time, we don't just have a voice, we have a video. This is the case of Lars Mittank, the 28-year-old tourist who walked into an airport and then ran out, never to be seen again. Lars Mittank was a 28-year-old German man, quiet, friendly, and healthy. In June of 2014, he traveled with friends to Varna, Bulgaria, a coastal resort town on the Black Sea, popular with European tourists for its cheap drinks and summer parties. By all accounts, the trip started out fine. Drinks, laughter, and the sun. But everything changed on the night of June 30th. Lars got into a scuffle outside a bar, possibly over a disagreement about soccer teams. He ended up with a ruptured eardrum from the fight. A minor injury, but enough to ground him from flying. His friends offered to stay, but Lars insisted that they go ahead. He'd stay back for a few days, rest, and catch a later flight. He checked into a cheap hotel near the airport, Hotel Color, and that's when things started to get, well, bizarre. According to text messages and phone calls to his mother, Lars started acting paranoid. He told her he was being followed, that he was in danger, and in one call, he whispered that he was hiding from 4 men who were trying to kill him. He begged her to cancel his credit cards, and at one point, Lars left the hotel in the middle of the night, disappearing for hours before returning. Staff described his behavior as nervous, jumpy, and erratic. He paced the lobby, peeked out windows, and reportedly told employees that he didn't feel safe. But it gets stranger. On July 8th, Lars went to the Varna airport. His flight home was booked, and he had an appointment with the airport doctor to confirm if it was safe to fly with his ear injury. The doctor gave him the green light, but then something set him off. As soon as the doctor left the room, Lars abruptly stood up, left his luggage behind, and bolted out of the airport terminal. Surveillance cameras show him running at full speed through the airport. He darted across the parking lot, ran past a fence into a field, and was never seen again. Not a single confirmed sighting since. No body, no phone, no credit card activity, no passport use, literally nothing. Authorities searched the surrounding area, fields, woods, nearby buildings, but found no trace of him. And over the years, alleged sightings have come in from places like Germany and even Canada, but none have been confirmed. And here's the question that keeps people up at night. What was Lars running from? Was it psychosis? Some believe he may have had a sudden onset of a mental health condition like paranoid schizophrenia, often triggered in young men in their late 20s. His behavior, paranoia, fear of being followed, sudden disappearance, fits the pattern, but others aren't convinced. Why did he whisper about men trying to kill him? Why did he tell his mother to cancel his credit cards? Why flee the airport without a passport or wallet? Some theorize he may have gotten tangled up in, something darker, perhaps unknowingly witnessing a crime, or he became the target of local criminals after the bar fight. There are even rumors of organ trafficking and corrupt medical staff, but no evidence has ever surfaced to back those up. Whatever the truth is, Lars' final moments on camera, a man fleeing like his life depends on it, leave behind a haunting image, a desperate escape from what we still don't know. Lars vanished from a crowded airport in broad daylight, leaving behind a trail of fear, paranoia, and endless questions. A man who seemed to be running from his life, from something we still can't explain. But while that mystery unfolded in modern times, in a city with cameras and cell phones, our next case happened in a small American town long before the age of instant communication, where the only witnesses were family, the only clues were ashes, and the missing weren't just one person. They were 5 children, and their disappearance would haunt the nation for generations. This is the story of the Sodder Children, a case that begins with a house fire on Christmas Eve and ends in one of the most chilling and controversial unsolved disappearances in American history. On Christmas Eve 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a family gathered together to celebrate the holiday. George and Jenny Sodder were Italian immigrants who had built a good life in Fayetteville. George owned a successful trucking business. They had 10 children and lived in a 2-story home just outside of town. On the night of December 24th, 1945, 5 of the Sodder children, Maurice, age 14, Martha, age 12, Louis, age 9, Jenny, age 8, and Betty, age 5, asked if they could stay up a little later to play with the toys that they'd received earlier that evening. Their mother agreed and went to bed. along with George and a few of the older siblings. Sometime around 1 a.m., Jenny Sodder was awakened by the sound of something thudding onto the roof and then rolling. Moments later, she smelled smoke. The house was on fire. In a panic, the family rushed to escape. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children made it out, but the 5 youngest were nowhere to be found. The fire burned the Sodder home to the ground in just 45 minutes. Firefighters didn't arrive until 8 hours later due to the holiday and a reported delay in alerting the department. Now, when the ashes were sifted through, investigators were shocked to discover no bones, no bodies, nothing. Experts later testified that human bones, should have survived even in the hottest house fire. Yet there was zero physical evidence of the 5 children. Authorities quickly ruled the case an accident, blaming faulty wiring. But the Sodder family didn't buy that. And as more strange details came to light, it became impossible to ignore the possibility that something else had happened that night. The clues, and they are chilling, began stacking up almost immediately. The Christmas lights in the house stayed on for part of the fire, suggesting the electricity hadn't failed right away, contradicting the faulty wiring theory. George's ladder, which he always kept by the house, was missing during the fire. It was later found tossed in a nearby ditch. His trucks, which he had intended to use to rescue the children, wouldn't start, despite working perfectly the day before. A woman claimed to have seen some of the children peering out of a car window that same night, watching the flame. Another witness said she saw them at a restaurant the next morning, accompanied by adults of Italian appearance who refused to speak to her. Even more disturbing, a bus driver claimed to have seen fireballs being thrown at the house that night. Years later, a worker found a green hard rubber object near the property, believed to be a pineapple bomb. George Sodder was convinced the mafia had targeted his family. He had been outspoken about his political beliefs, especially his criticism of Benito Mussolini, and he believed this had made him enemies in the Italian immigrant community. The Sodders hired private investigators. They plastered the country with flyers. They put up a massive billboard on Route 16 with the children's photos and the haunting question, what was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered? In 1967, the Sodders received a bizarre letter postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photo of a young man in his 20s with similar features to Lewis, one of the missing children. On the back, it read, "Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie." The family was stunned, but nothing ever came of the lead. George Sodder died in 1969, still believing his children had been kidnapped. Jenny continued the search until her death in 1989. The remaining Sodder children and their descendants have tried to keep the case alive, hoping that one day the truth will come out. But all these years later, the case remains a black hole of speculation. Were the children taken? Was the fire a cover-up, or did they perish? Their remains somehow lost in the chaos. No answers, no closure, just a family torn apart, and 5 little faces that never grew up. The disappearance of the Sodder children left behind ashes, silence, and the agony of not knowing. A family that searched for answers until their dying days, haunted by a single, unrelenting question. What happened to our children? But not every disappearance begins with fire or chaos. Some begin quietly, with a full tank of gas, with a handwritten note, with a woman driving west, chasing freedom, and unknowingly heading toward a mystery that would rival the darkest of fiction. Our next case takes us across the country and into the life of Leah Roberts, a free spirit on a cross-country journey of self-discovery who vanished somewhere in the misty woods of Washington state. And the only thing more disturbing than her disappearance is what she left behind. Leah Roberts was 23 years old in March of 2000. She lived in Durham, North Carolina, and was finishing her studies at North Carolina State University. But her life, up until that point, had been shaped by unimaginable trauma. Her father died of a chronic illness. Her mother died of heart disease just months later. And then in 1996, Leah herself was in a serious car accident. She survived, but with lingering injuries, including a metal rod in her leg and persistent fatigue. After that, something shifted in her. Leah began to explore spirituality, philosophy, and travel. She became fascinated by the life of Jack Kerouac, particularly his book The Dharma Bums, which celebrated freedom, solitude, and the wild landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. Then, without telling anyone, Leah packed her things and disappeared. She withdrew money from her bank account, left behind a note explaining she was going on a journey of self-discovery, and took her white Jeep Cherokee. But she didn't tell her roommate, she didn't call her siblings, she just left. A week after she disappeared, Leah's sister Cara reported her missing. By that time, Leah had already driven across the country, over 2,500 miles, making stops in Memphis, New Orleans, and finally Oregon. She used her debit card to pay for gas and food. At one coffee shop, she spoke to a barista about traveling to the Cascade Mountains near Seattle. Then, nothing. No more transactions, no phone calls, no sightings, until March 18th, when her Jeep was found crashed and abandoned on a remote logging road near Bellingham, Washington. And that's when the story takes a much darker turn. Leah's Jeep had apparently launched off an embankment, hurtling over 30 feet before slamming into the forest floor. But inside the wreck, things, didn't add up. The driver's seatbelt wasn't engaged. There was no blood, no broken glass, and no signs of any injuries. Even more strange, several of Leah's personal belongings were inside the car. Clothes, pillows, and even her favorite cat's blanket. But her car keys, her wallet, her phone, it was all gone. Police also discovered that someone had cut the car's wires, suggesting the crash may have been staged. But it gets even weirder. Hidden under a floor mat was Leah's mother's engagement ring and nearly $2,500 in cash, untouched. On the front seat was a ticket stub from a movie theater in Bellingham, and the movie, American Beauty. Investigators raced to the theater. Staff remembered Leah and someone with her, a young man with dark hair. He was never identified. Despite search efforts, tracking dogs, and extensive investigation, there was no sign of Leah in the surrounding woods. It was as if she had simply vanished into the forest. In 2006, 6 years after she disappeared, a man came forward claiming to have buried her body, but his story quickly unraveled. He was never charged and Leah's body was never found. One theory is that Leah met someone on the road, someone she trusted, who turned out to be dangerous. Another suggests she may have wandered off into the wilderness and succumbed to the elements, but there's also the haunting possibility that she also faked her own disappearance, a complete break from her old life. But if that's true, why leave behind the money, the ring, the wrecked car? Leah Roberts set out on a quest for freedom, only to disappear amid the misty trees of the Pacific Northwest, her journey ending in a silent wreck, her fate swallowed by the woods. But not every vanishing act happens in remote shadows. Some unfold under the brightest of lights, in places designed for safety and joy, where parents can almost see their children with every glance. Our next story takes us from the quiet expanse of Washington's logging roads to the sun-drenched Algarve coast of Portugal. This is the case of Madeleine McCann, the little girl who vanished from her holiday bed, turning a tranquil resort into the epicenter of one of history's most haunting unsolved mysteries. It was May 3rd, 2007 in Praia de Luz, a picturesque seaside village in the Algarve region of Portugal. The McCann family, parents Jerry and Kate and their 3 children, Madeleine and her younger twin siblings, were on a week-long holiday with friends at the Ocean Club Resort. That evening, Jerry and Kate put their kids to bed in their apartment around 8:30 p.m. and joined their friends for dinner at a nearby tapas restaurant just 160 feet away with a clear view of the apartment complex. The adults took turns checking in on their sleeping children every 20 or 30 minutes. At 10 p.m., when Kate McCann returned for her check-in, she walked into a nightmare. The window was open, the shutter was raised, and Madeleine's bed was empty. Within minutes, the resort was in chaos. Staff, guests, and locals began searching the area, but no trace of Madeleine was found. Portuguese police arrived, but early hours were lost due to poor coordination and confusion over whether this was a kidnapping or a simple case of a child, wandering off. Within days, the case exploded into international headlines. Photographs of a bright-eyed 3-year-old with blonde hair and a distinctive mark in her right eye were everywhere. Millions were gripped by the case, and as the days turned to weeks, the story only got more twisted. Investigators quickly began pursuing multiple theories, and the McCanns, once seen as victims, became suspects in the public eye. Police claimed there were inconsistencies in their statements. Cadaver dogs brought into the apartment alerted to the scent of human decomposition and blood behind a sofa and in the trunk of a rental car the family used weeks after Madeleine disappeared. But no conclusive physical evidence ever supported the theory that Madeleine died in the apartment. The McCanns were officially declared formal suspects, but that status was lifted in 2008. They were never charged with any crime. Meanwhile, tips and sightings poured in from all over the world: Morocco, Malta, Spain, even Canada. But every lead went nowhere. Then came the manhunt. In 2013, British police launched Operation Grange, a renewed investigation that involved over 40 officers and a $15 million budget. Their focus? A new suspect. An unidentified man seen carrying a child near the resort the night that Madeleine had vanished. Multiple suspects were interrogated, and at one point, a man in the same resort complex was investigated for alleged child abuse. But perhaps the most disturbing twist came years later in 2020 when German prosecutors announced they had a new suspect, a man named Christian Bruckner, a convicted sex offender with a long criminal history who was living in Portugal at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. He reportedly made disturbing comments about children and was known to burglarize homes in the area. German authorities claimed that they had concrete evidence that Madeleine was dead, but have never publicly revealed what that evidence is, nor have they charged Bruckner with her disappearance. As of now, he remains under investigation, but no charges. No closure. What makes Madeleine McCann's case so haunting isn't just how much attention it received, but how a child could disappear so quickly in such a public place under the watch of loving parents with no one seeing a thing. She was 3 years old, she was sleeping in her bed, and in a matter of minutes, she was gone. All these years later, her face still lingers, printed on missing posters, documentaries, and the minds of millions. Madeleine McCann's disappearance stunned the world, not just because of where it happened, but how it happened. A vibrant seaside resort, a crowded apartment complex, and yet, in the middle of it all, a child vanished without a trace. But the next story takes us somewhere far quieter, a small town in the American South, a close-knit family, a little girl safe in her own bed, or so everyone thought. It was Valentine's Day weekend in the year 2000 in Shelby, North Carolina, a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other and doors were often left unlocked. Asha Degree lived with her parents, Harold and Aquila, and her older brother O'Brien. By all accounts, the Degree family was loving, devoutly religious, and deeply protective. Asha was a shy, well-behaved 4th grader. She loved reading, playing basketball, and doing her schoolwork. She wasn't the kind of kid who got into trouble or wandered far from home, which makes what happened next all the more baffling. On the night of February 13th, 2000, the Degrees went to church, then home. There was a small power outage due to a storm, but the family settled in. At around 8 p.m., Asha and her brother went to bed in the room they shared. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but sometime between 2:30 and 3:15 a.m., something completely changed. Asha quietly got out of bed. She took her backpack, packed it with clothes, school supplies, and her favorite Tweety Bird purse. She put on her sneakers, and while the wind and rain lashed against the house, she walked out of the front door, into the night, alone. Between 3:30 and 4 a.m., 2 separate drivers reported seeing a small figure walking along Highway 18, about a mile from Asha's home. One driver circled back, concerned. As he approached, the girl bolted off the roadside and ran into the woods. That was the last confirmed sighting of Asha Degree. When her parents discovered her missing later that morning, on Valentine's Day, they were, horrified. The front door had been locked, There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. A 9-year-old girl had seemingly planned her own disappearance and executed it with chilling precision. But why? Over the next several days, police and volunteers searched the area. Tracking dogs picked up her scent along Highway 18, but it disappeared near a shed. Inside, they found a candy wrapper, a pencil, and a marker. Items that may have belonged to Asha. Then, more than a year later, came a chilling discovery. In August of 2001, Asha's backpack was found buried in a plastic bag off the side of a remote construction site in Burke County, about 26 miles away. Inside were her belongings, neatly packed, still intact. The location was deeply wooded and far from any roads Asha could have reached on foot. Someone had buried it, but who? And why? And what happened to Asha after that night? Despite years of investigation, the truth remains elusive. Some believe Asha ran away due to something troubling at home, but there's no evidence of abuse or conflict. Nothing in her journals or school life suggested distress. Others fear she was lured by someone she met, possibly through school or by phone. Someone who convinced her to meet in secret. But again, no such person has ever been identified. And then there's the possibility that someone saw her walking that night and took advantage of her vulnerability. In 2016, the FBI announced a potential break. Someone reported seeing Asha get into a dark green 1970s Lincoln Continental along the highway. But even that lead went cold. A $45,000 reward has been offered. Billboards still show her face. Her parents still keep her room just as it was. It's been over 2 decades since Asha Degree walked out of her home in the middle of the night. No one knows why, no one knows where she went, and no one knows what or who she encountered in the shadows. She would have been in her 30s today, but to her parents, she's still 9 years old, still missing, but never forgotten. And somewhere out there, someone knows the truth. Asha Degree's case is the kind that leaves a permanent ache. A child slipping out into the night, no clear reason, no clear destination, and no clear end. A story where every discovered clue only deepens the mystery. But not all vanishings happen in the dark. Some unfold under neon lights, in places buzzing with music, laughter, and surveillance cameras. Some disappearances happen in full view of the world, and somehow we still miss them. Our next case takes us to Columbus, Ohio, to a crowded bar on a college campus. This is the case of Brian Shaffer, the man who entered a bar and never came back out. Brian Shaffer was 27 years old, a second-year medical student at Ohio State University in Columbus. He was described by friends as outgoing, smart, charming, someone who loved music, dreamed of becoming a doctor, and had plans to propose to his girlfriend. But beneath the surface, Brian was going through a tough time. Just weeks before his disappearance, in March of 2006, his mother Renee died after a battle with cancer. The grief was heavy, but Brian still seemed to be functioning, trying to move forward. Spring break was approaching and he had a trip to Miami planned with his girlfriend. But first, he wanted a night out. It was Friday, March 31st, 2006, the first day of spring break. Brian went out with his friend Clint Florence to celebrate. They started the night with a few drinks at a bar, then made their way to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a bar located on the second floor of a building in Columbus, University District. Surveillance footage shows Brian at 1:15 a.m. riding the escalator up to the bar, smiling, joking with his friends. Over the next 45 minutes, he's seen inside, drinking and chatting with patrons. At 1:55 a.m., Brian is seen on surveillance again outside the bar's entrance, talking to 2 women. He appears calm. He waves goodbye and walks back towards the entrance of the bar, and that's the last time that he is ever seen. And here's where the case becomes truly surreal. The Ugly Tuna Saloona only had one public entrance and exit, the same escalator Brian used to come in. The area was under constant surveillance. Investigators reviewed hours of footage. Brian never appeared leaving the bar. Not down the escalator, not through the service exit, not through a side door, nothing. It was as if he vanished inside the bar. Police considered the idea that he might have changed clothes and, slipped past unnoticed, but they found no evidence of that. They questioned staff, patrons, and reviewed all footage frame by frame. Still, No Brian. Over the next few days, police, friends, and family launched a massive search. They checked hospitals, morgues, alleyways. They scoured nearby construction sites, thinking maybe he'd fallen or gotten injured. No trace. Theories began swirling that Brian had died accidentally inside the bar and someone covered it up, that he slipped away intentionally, faking his disappearance to start a new life, that he was abducted or killed in the bar and somehow removed without being seen, that he was maybe lured out through a back exit and was met with foul play. But none of them added up. Brian left behind his wallet, his credit cards, his cell phone. None were ever used again. His car was untouched. His passport was still at home. He had a vacation booked, a loving girlfriend, and had just been talking about his future. Why would he walk away? Brian's father, Randy Shaffer, never gave up. He posted flyers, gave interviews, and kept searching, even as the years dragged on with no answers. In a tragic twist, Randy died in 2008. Just 2 years later, in a freak accident during a windstorm. At his memorial, someone anonymously left a condolence message online, signed simply, "To Dad, love Brian." Authorities traced the post and it turned out to be a cruel hoax. Now, there are disappearances that shock us, and then there are those that just don't make sense. Brian Shaffer walked into a bar on a crowded night. Security cameras were watching. His friends were nearby. There were no signs of a struggle, no goodbye notes, no real warning, and yet he was never seen again. It's been nearly 20 years, and his face remains frozen in time, smiling on a grainy surveillance tape, waving goodbye, and walking into a mystery no one can explain. These have been 7 of the most disturbing unsolved disappearances of all time. If you found this video compelling, consider sharing it, and if you want more deep dives into chilling mysteries like these, don't forget to subscribe with those post notifications on, because sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones that we make up. They're the ones that are real and unsolved. And with that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.